Are we live?
It said we're live.
Okay,
Do we trust
amazing.
StreamYard?
I think we do.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, hi. I'm so excited to be talking to you, Jackie. This is a wonderful author to friend of mine, Jacqueline Pretty, and she just had the release of her book, Powerless, and I'm going to read her bio really quick, just before, yeah, just before we start talking, because I love your bio. It's so good. So, Jacqueline Pretty is the author of Powerless, which won the 2022 Killer Nashville Claymore Award for the best unpublished book in the young adult category, and was shortlisted for the Chanticleer Book Review's Dante Rossetti Young Adult Award. An Australian and a travel addict, Jackie has lived in 5 countries and traveled to over 40. The fictional city of Paxlina in Powerless is inspired by Tallinn, Estonia, where she lived for 3 years. She currently lives in Melbourne, but her heart dreams of returning to Europe. Beautiful.
Thank you for that intro. It's the first time I've heard anyone else read it out loud, so it's like, oh.
Yeah. I think it's really good. I love that, and we'll talk about it later, how you have like the awards for the book and how you went and entered it in all these competitions and things. I think it's super exciting. So maybe let's just start off, and can you pitch the book for us and tell us what Powerless
I should have prepared for this. So Powerless is a young adult sci-fi, and it's about a 16-year-old girl named Hanna who is the only one in her family who doesn't have superpowers. And one day there is a research leak in her father's lab. Her father is the man who discovered the super gene mutation in this universe, and he uses that as an excuse to force her out of the home with the ultimatum, don't come back until you have powers, and then she needs to decide how far she'll go to prove herself.
Beautiful. And so it's YA, it's a superhero book, and it's kind of like action adventure-y, right?
Yeah, though I have had, because now there are more reviews coming in, and there are some who have said, oh, it's not as much action as you'd expect in a superhero book, so
I think
I feel like it counts as action adventure.
I would agree with that one. And so just on that note, what are your kind of hopes that you're going with it, and like who would like it?
When I was querying, it's been a while since I queried because obviously I decided to self-publish. So I'm trying to remember. The best comp is probably the Renegades trilogy by Marissa Meyer, which is like a superhero. The two point of view characters. One's from the big superhero conglomerate. The other one's from the villains who still haven't been defeated, and that's a lot of fun. And then in terms of like tone of voice or style, I compare it to The Archived by Victoria Schwab, as well as Elements of High Society by Ali Carter.
Yes, I remember like thinking of that while I was reading it the first time, especially.
Well, I actually
the end of...
I think we got a little bit of a lag.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're frozen, though.
Oh.
We can keep talking. Maybe you'll come back.
Yeah, hopefully. What was I saying? Yes, especially towards the end of the book, I saw the Ali Carter connection. All right. So just for kind of the purposes, the recording purposes, where do we go to buy it if we want it? Just to get it right off the front, that information.
Yeah, you can get it from anywhere. You can find books online. Amazon's probably the easiest place because it's available anywhere, but it's available in so many different countries. But you can also find it on Barnes & Noble, Waterstones if you're in the UK, Booktopia if you're in Australia. So anywhere where good books are sold.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can see that I'm frozen, and I don't know why, since I searched everywhere for the best Wi-Fi.
One of the joys of working on the road.
I know. We can just keep talking, I guess. And if it gets really bad, do something. But I have 100 or something more megabytes. So apparently, I'm not sure why we're getting a free thing. But that's okay. We'll just move on forward. So, can you tell us about where the book started?
So it started in 2019 when I did NaNoWriMo for the first time. So in fact, it probably started a little bit before that because I used to have a publishing company called Grammar Factory, which turned entrepreneurs into authors. And I'd been running that for about 6 years, I think. And in May of 2019, I went to this big conference for sort of spirituality and personal development. And the theme of it this year was expand your influence. So I thought, oh, great, I'm going to find people who want to write books. It'll be perfect. And then on the second morning of this conference, we did like a guided journaling exercise. And one of the steps was like, imagine where you want to be in 3 to 5 years, and then take like a helicopter view of your life and everything you've got going on, and then reach out to your future self in 3 to 5 years and ask them what you need to let go of in order to be where you want. And where I wanted to be was writing fiction. And future Jackie said, well, you've got to let go of Grammar Factory. And I was like, this is not why I came to this event. I did not come here to get rid of my business. So I sat on that for a couple of days, but realized that I had this thing that was taking up a lot of, just mostly mental and creative energy. And I had to let it go in order to start writing. So that began the process of looking for like a new owner for the business. And the sale was finalized in September 2019. And then October 2019, I started outlining Powerless. So I outlined it in October, then November started writing. And by the end of December, I had the first draft.
That's such a cool story that you sold your business and really realized you wanted to focus on writing.
Yeah, it was, when I think back to it, I think the reason I started the business was because I wanted to focus on writing, because the idea was that the business would be successful enough that I'd buy all this time. And it was doing well, but it was like the mental and creative energy, which I said earlier. And, it is a big thing to hold in your head, especially if you want to be creating other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think about that, even if you're not actively working on something at the moment, it's kind of happening in the back of your head. So it's like mind space. It can be so hard to concentrate when you have so many different things going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what drew you to superheroes? Because I know there's science and DNA in the book, and it's really exciting. I'd love to hear about that.
I had a dream. So most of my story ideas come from dreams, and this one, so I mentioned earlier that Hanna gets forced out of home because she doesn't have powers, and I actually dreamt of this scene where she's forced out of home. So I dreamt of this scene around the family dining table when she was given the ultimatum. I saw her going upstairs and then being pursued by one of her siblings who had fire powers, and she was hiding in the bathroom behind the bath and thought she was safe. And then the sister came in and filled the room with fire, and Hannah's struggling to get away and forces her way out the window, falls out the window into the rose bush. And then the sister says, don't bother coming back until you have powers. And that I actually dreamt that scene, and that was the start of the book. So that was the idea. And then it was well, what sort of story would have that scene?
That's so cool. And it's cool to see how it evolved too, because in the end, the sister with fire powers, and this isn't a spoiler, she's the one that Hannah's closest to.
Yeah, she's the good one.
Yeah, she's the good one.
Comments.
And all the other ones. It's so cool how you came up with the powers too. There's is it Maxim with the pain one?
Mm-hmm.
He inflicts the pain onto other people. It gives you the heebie-jeebies. It's so good.
Well, I think what's interesting is that it has to be he can't just make someone feel pain. It's his pain. Yeah. So he's often injuring himself in some way. So he has that as fuel that he can use to hurt someone else.
That's so cool. It's so creative too. And was it easy to come up with all the superpowers, or did it come really quick, or was it something like a bigger brainstorming process?
I see, this is the problem, catching up 4 years after you've written the book. I don't remember it being a big thing. I think it was just I knew Maria had to have the firepower because of the dream, and
Yeah.
the others I think was just random. Like it was, oh, I think this power will work, and then the scenes
Yeah.
developed from there.
That's awesome. So you started writing it in October of 2019, finished it in December. I'm remembering
Yes,
that
I
correctly.
outlined in October,
Yeah.
and I had this thing which, if you look back at my YouTube channel, you can see I like to try out different plotting methods. So that was the first time I had 3 different methods that I tried out to outline this book. And then, yeah, started, I'm guessing, on the 1st of November for NaNoWriMo, and then November and December wrote the first draft.
Yes. I love those videos, by the way. Those are
Thank you.
they're some of my favorite videos of yours. And so you wrote the first draft. Can you kind of take us through just like briefly the number, like the process, the number of drafts you had to do, like how much editing, what did your process kind of look like?
So, I think it'd be helpful to do a distinction between like drafts and versions, because I had a number of
Okay.
versions of Powerless, but when I think of like a new draft, I think of a complete or maybe not a complete rewrite, but let's say 50% of the book gets replaced. Like it's
Yeah.
significantly different.
Yeah.
I don't think Powerless had multiple drafts. It had multiple versions. Like I think version 6 was probably the one that went to print, but most of what's in the first draft is in the final
Yeah.
book. It's still the same story. It's more just been polished. And the process of editing and revising was a lot of adding to it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think my first draft was maybe 68,000 words, and the final printed book is 84,000. So, yeah, most of that, not all of the 68, but most of that 68 is still there. It's just polished and added to.
Nice. Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah, it's funny. I would think of it almost the other way, like version being a completely different version of the story, and then
Oh,
draft
okay.
being just like I have it different in
I
my
think because
head.
I
But
think of like version
yeah.
control, like when you're in corporate and you do
Oh,
like a version of a document,
yeah.
it might just have a few small changes.
That's a really good way to think of it. Yeah, that's exactly what I think. Is like basically every through the book where I'm changing things, like think of as a draft. But
Mm.
version makes sense at Google Doc or whatever it is, version control. Love it. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of like writing craft things because
Yeah.
I love some of this stuff in Powerless, and how you structure it. I think you have a really
Mm.
cool structure. You use a lot of flashbacks, and I remember you kind of talking about how it maybe weren't there from the very beginning, or only some of them were. Like it opens, the prologue is a beautiful
Mm.
flashback, it's like gorgeous writing. So could you tell us a little bit about those and like why they were included, how you got there?
Yeah, so this was one of the things that was added after the first draft. So I one of the things about like a superhero action adventure type of story is that they're very fast paced. And one of the struggles with a fast paced story is like, when do you have time for the emotional beats? And one of the things I've done through revisions is actually slowed down to have more of those beats. But when I was reading through it, maybe 4 or 5 months after I had finished the first draft and had been letting it sit, I knew that I wanted the relationship between the sisters, Hanna and Maria, to be the heart of the story. And even though I like really enjoyed reading it, I didn't feel like it was there yet. And the big reason for that is because it's around like the 20-25% mark, I think, that Hannah gets kicked out of home. So her sister isn't around for a lot of the story, which means you don't have a lot of time to build that relationship. So I felt like the flashbacks were a good way to incorporate that. I also did get inspiration for the style of flashbacks from The Archived by Victoria Schwab, which I mentioned earlier. And so one of the things I love is learning from books that do things well. And if I find a book that I like, it's not uncommon for me to go and create a spreadsheet and map it out beat by beat, or try and figure out what they do well to incorporate in my own writing. And I wanted to look at The Archived because that is also partially a sibling story. It follows Mac, I think, Mackenzie, is the main character whose brother recently died before the book. So the brother doesn't exactly exist in the book, but that pain of his death is like the emotional heart of the story. And the way that relationship was conveyed was through a lot of flashbacks. So I sort of read through to see what she'd done and how that she did that. And I went, oh, maybe I could do the same thing. So, yeah, the idea for the flashbacks was to have more of Hanna and Maria. And there were like a couple which the ideas just came out of nowhere. Like, oh, did any of them come out of nowhere? I think it's what you said earlier, where like it's still ticking away in the back of your mind. But I know that I wanted to add the prologue because I felt like the first couple of chapters are a bit slow, and this is a superhero book, so we should have something with like superhero powers very early on. So the prologue is when Maria's powers first emerge. So that sort of helps set the stage for the type of book it's going to be. There's one of the things that happens in the book is Hanna self-harms, and there's a cutting scene, and I just randomly had the idea of, oh, it would be really nice to have a flashback for when she'd done it earlier and see how Maria reacts to that. And then there were things that were more, can't think of the word, practical or utilitarian is probably a better word, which was like after Hannah's kicked out of home, I added in a scene that wasn't there in the first draft where she and Maria sort of have their goodbye before Hanna needs to leave for good. And one of the things we establish in the book is that Hanna hasn't really left the house in a couple of years. So she doesn't know the city around her. So I'm like, okay, well, how can we make it work so they have a meeting point? So we had this flashback scene where Maria had a big book of maps that they always looked through when they were younger. And then that also helps create Maria's character as someone who wants to break free from this life and is dreaming of things outside of her family's household. I think I'm starting to ramble a bit, but yeah, the idea was that I wanted to have more time to build up the relationship between the sisters, and then the individual flashbacks were either random ideas or inserted like based on necessity or things that would help pave the way for present day events.
Yeah, I remember reading the one where they kind of establish the meeting place and then she goes to the meeting place. I thought that was really cool. And so much of a better way to, like, it was so emotional in a much better way than an info dump to be like, and since they decided they would meet somewhere in an emergency. So I really love that. And I also love what you said about kind of taking your favorite books and sort of writing down the beats of them. You said you did that for a couple of different ones. Could you talk about your process for how you do it all? It's something that I've started to do, and I've been like, why have I not been doing this forever? And I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
So I think this is my experience, at least. When you're a fiction writer, it can feel like there's no method or formula. It's just, that's a really good story, and I don't know how they did that. And because of that, I feel like the first craft book you read that sort of breaks down story structure, and it doesn't really matter how they break down story structure, but the fact that they're able to break down story structure, it's like this revelatory experience. Like for me, this was Story Engineering by Larry Brooks, which breaks down books into 4 parts and has like, at this percentage point, this thing will happen, and so on. I know you love Story Grid. And for me, because story engineering was my first thing, that's sort of how I think about the overall structure of stories, which these are the 4 parts. Here are the key beats or turning points in the parts. And when I'm going through a book, I'll often go, okay, how far through am I? And that means, okay, the climax is about to start now, or, oh, we're getting to the middle, so there's going to be a shift type of thing. So having that framework helps me analyze the things that I'm reading, especially if it happens to be on Kindle, because you get the percentage at the bottom of the screen. So it's like, oh, 70%. Okay, we're coming close to the climax. So and obviously if I'm really enjoying a story, I don't notice that consciously so much. But if I enjoy it and then go back, that's what I'm looking for. So what are the things that happen at those beats, and do they happen like exactly at that point, or are they a bit different? Are there a couple of different events that could be the main beats? So I'll usually start with those big events and then just see what slots in around it. And sometimes sometimes it's more confusing than useful. Like I find the more complex a book gets, the harder it is to shoehorn into these structures, especially when you're getting into multiple points of view and multiple timelines. But I think just thinking about stories is helpful, even if you don't draw any conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really cool, even just to read with like a writer's mindset. I've been trying to work on, and this is a question I think I have like right now, so it's a good transition about like sort of interiority and emotionality of the characters and how to express them. I don't know if you've ever found this, but sometimes I'll find when I'm writing adventure stories, I'm like, and we're doing this, and we're doing this, and we're doing this, and I don't necessarily pause to ever have the character like think about their emotions or share the thoughts a little bit. So when I was doing Heretics Anonymous recently, and I was just kind of reading that from a writer's perspective and being like, oh, look at how they did this, or like, look at how they started this, how they start all of these chapters, and just seeing sort of the progressions. It's so cool.
Absolutely. And now I've got to reread Heretics Anonymous.
Yeah, I really love that book. It's
such a great book.
Yeah, it's so good. So on that note, okay, so there's a specific page I wanted to talk about.
Yes.
It's page 99.
I've got it with me, so.
Whatever it is. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because it's an area in the book where I really recognized that there was a difference, there was a change. So in the draft that I read, because I was a beta reader, I don't know if I've mentioned that yet, but I got to read it early, which is so cool. There were about 377 words of Hanna. Basically, she decides she needs to go and try to get powers by kind of getting into trouble. And so in the version that I read, it was 377 words. And she, like, and I remember taking it and thinking, well, this is really good, but I don't quite understand. It's not totally convincing to me. I think I looked back at my like comment on the Word doc and I was like, this isn't convincing. I don't really understand why she wants this. And then in the version, obviously, I read it and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is incredible. She totally fixed it. I believe it now. I think, you know, you went through and you you went through, I think you added, I just want to read a tiny bit of it. It used to kind of be that she just said, all right, I want to get powers. And now you have her kind of questioning herself. Like, part of her knew this one thought would be laughable. Would it really be possible to go back? And then she remembers what it was like to be there, and you kind of really get her motivation. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And that's one area that I noticed. And also, if there's any other areas that you really focused in on editing.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that came up from like beta reader feedback and mostly beta reader feedback and some of the manuscript critiques I had was not understanding the motivations so well. And for me, I feel like, and this might be, I did a lot of drama in school, so I feel like with characters, I just inhabit them a lot. And for me, it feels so natural for them to be coming from where they're coming from that I don't need to explain it. But then it's like when someone's outside of your head, they don't have that same understanding or journey. So a lot of it was just trying to put into words why the characters were doing what they were doing, or why Hanna, because she's the main character. I think that sorry, I've just lost my train of thought.
No worries.
Yeah, it's the end of the day. Like I just got home from work before we hopped onto this interview. Yeah.
I like what you said about kind of, inhabiting the character's motivations and just remembering to put it on the page.
Yeah. I think, and also something else that came up, which isn't really what you asked about, but it is part of what informed this section, is the idea of would this really work, and questioning the character's motivation as well. And because there are certain things where, like, I would have it on the page and someone would read it and go, oh, this doesn't make sense to me, or I don't know why she'd believe this. And, you know, she's an intelligent person. Maybe she should acknowledge that this doesn't make sense. So there were a few bits where I sort of just added in the acknowledgement that, you know, she hoped it would work, but she could also see maybe it wouldn't, but like the hope is the only thing she has going for her, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the things I noticed most. The line that I just read out about her thinking to herself, you know, her thought was kind of laughable. You know, fixed everything for me, because you're like, oh, so she's not sure either. That makes total sense. Yeah. And it just kind of right away helps, you know, get rid of any believability issues there were there.
So that's great to hear. I'm glad it worked.
Yeah, having the character kind of question herself. Yeah. She's a super intelligent character.
Yeah, it's interesting because she's very intelligent, but she's very naive. And I think that's what sometimes gets people, because those two, like, intelligence and experience don't necessarily go hand in hand. Like, she's very book smart. Like, she's worked in the lab. She, you know, she knows all of the science, but she hasn't really been out in the real world. She's been homeschooled her entire life. She's been very isolated for at least the last couple of years, which is basically, for people watching, we have about a 2-year period before the book, which is when her father gave up on her getting powers. So we know she's been pretty isolated for the last couple of years. And, you know, before that, she was 14 or younger. So any experience or interaction she had out in the world, she, like, was much closer to child than young adult, which she is now.
Definitely. I think the naivete, I mean, that's part of what makes her such an interesting character, I'm sure. For you and for readers, is just the complete street smart, having one but not the other. And then she goes into the streets and starts getting it. So it's so exciting.
Yeah, she doesn't think ahead so much either, which leads to interesting situations. Like, so she's very intelligent, also very naive, not so great at forward planning. So she'll sort of think like, okay, here's the next action. She's very good at taking action. So like, here's the next action I need to take, but she doesn't really think like what will happen after that, until she sort of takes that action and goes, oh crap, what have I done? Look at the situation I found myself in.
I think it's very relatable too. It's very teenagery to have her be like that.
Yeah, no, it's been a long time since I was a teenager, and I'm still like that a lot of the time, so I can't really judge.
Awesome. The next thing I wanted to chat about, we just talked about Hanna taking action, and I have a little section I want to read, just because I'm so impressed by how you write your action scenes. So this is, again, near the beginning of the book, the same chunk we're talking about. It's like the 25% mark. I think why I'm so enamored with it is because it's really hard to write that sort of transition, that like plot point 1 or like break into 2, and this is kind of right where it is. And the action here, so I'm going to read this. So you wrote, Hanna fell on her backside and cried out, quickly flipping onto all fours to spring back up. But someone snatched her ankle and tugged it from under her. Hanna's body slammed to the ground, leaving her winded. Someone crawled on top of her, grabbing a fistful of her hair and lifting her face from the rock. What is wrong with you? Mikhail asked. I love that, because at every single point, I was so sure exactly what was happening. And I could see it so easily in my mind, what they were doing. And again, I think I'm interested in it because it's something that I also want to work on. I have trouble picturing sort of the bodies and the movement, the pushing, the pulling, etc. And I think you did such a great job with like the senses and the visceralness of it. And I would love, like, do you consciously have a strategy for that? How do you approach these sort of action scenes?
Short answer is no. No, I do. I quite like, I like writing things that are immediate. So action and dialogue are probably the things that come most naturally to me. But I'm also like a very physical person just in my life. Like I'm very aware of what's happening in my body. I did a lot of dancing growing up, so maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, I know for me, I think it's just I know where the bits of my body are. So like I do picture, it's really hard to describe because I do think it comes naturally. But yeah, because I am a very physical person, I guess it's easier to write that physicality. One thing I will say is as a reader, if a writer isn't as on top of like where people are situated in a scene, often like I'll hear that they moved. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't realize they were in that part of the room. And then I'll go back and try to like catch up and see what I missed. So it is something I notice when it's not there. But for me, I think like the physical side of the action isn't that difficult. It's more trying to keep up with the emotional side because in fact, there's a fight later in the book, which is in a flashback where Maria and Hanna are training together. And it's really boring until it isn't. But the beginning of the fight is very routine. Like they're going through the motions, sort of punch, kick, duck. And it doesn't feel interesting, even though, like, if you were watching it, the same things would be happening. And it's because, like, there's nothing at stake. You don't have that emotion. So one of the things I try to focus on is what is the person feeling in this moment. And I feel like that helps drive the action even more so than the physicality of it.
I love that because it's almost the opposite of what I would think when writing action of like, okay, what are they doing? But having it, and that makes sense in real life too, coming from their emotions and focusing there first and going action out from there. I love that approach. That's really smart.
Thank you.
And then how did you, because there's a lot of action scenes in the book, despite what apparently some of your reviews said, I think it's really did you put any conscious kind of effort into differentiating them to make them feel different or have them escalated?
No, I think it was not consciously. I think obviously it's an action book. You know that the final climactic battle scene needs to be the biggest one. So I always knew that one was going to be bigger. The others were really driven by the situation. So we've got, and the characters involved, because there are some that have people with superpowers in them, which obviously changes the dynamic, and there are some which don't. So like the very first action scene in the book is actually one that Hannah's not involved in. She's watching a recording of some not security footage, phone footage taken from a hostage in like a bank situation. And that has like her 4 siblings who all have superpowers, who end up fighting against other people who surprisingly have superpowers, which they hadn't expected. So that sets up a very different fight to the one you just looked at, which is, 3 people who don't have any powers at all. And it's 2 grown men and Hanna, who's, 16-year-old girl who has some training, but a bit rusty. She's also a lot smaller than these guys and outnumbered. So that creates a very different dynamic. The first fight in the hostage situation is much more evenly balanced. Whereas the one you were just looking at, that's quite short. Like it's over before it's even begun, basically, because she's so outnumbered. And that wasn't a conscious decision. That's just, well, these are the pieces we have on the board and that's what's going to happen. Similarly, there's another one, the one where she's running from her home and her father sets her siblings on her. This is another one where she's far outmatched because she's got 4 people, so 4 against 1. 4 of them all have superpowers. She doesn't. So she's not fighting at all then. Like all she can do is run and try to survive and escape from them to then figure out the next move. So yeah, there wasn't really a conscious effort to increase the stakes each time, except for knowing that I was heading towards this big battle at the end. It was more just knowing the people I had available and what would naturally arise from putting them against each other.
Beautiful. And I think that's the way you want it to be done. And I'm really taking this and learning from it. You tried some of my action scenes. There's been a couple where you're like, and what were they doing? And they were fine. But I like
Well,
that
that's
sometimes
beta
you get
readers are
so
great for that.
yeah, they really are. You can get so caught up in the action that yeah, just keeping an eye on like just focusing on the characters is what I'm really taking away, and I love that approach to it. Speaking of the
Yeah, I
ending,
think
and I know we can, oh sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say, like, another note on action scenes is I think some writers, and in fact when I like was much younger trying to write, I did this as well. I think it's very easy to include action for the sake of action because you think, oh, people want big exciting battle scenes or big exciting fights, and no, they don't. Not if it doesn't mean anything. Like if there's nothing at stake. So there's no point like inserting a fight scene or running scene or any type of action scene just for the sake of having it. Like it needs to mean something when it comes to the character or the wider story.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The stakes are huge, I think, and the stakes get so big by the end of your book too. And obviously, I don't want to spoil anything, but the end of the book, kind of right before the climax, there's like a big thing before the climax. I think it changed a lot from the version that I read. Is that the case? Am I right on
I don't think so.
No.
Maybe I might have to go like because I've still got the version that you looked at as a document. I might need to combine them in a word and see what the changes are.
See
But
what the changes are.
yeah, I don't think that changed. Oh, it's really I'm going to have to like ask you outside of the call so we're not spoiling anyone to see what you think changed because no, I feel like you basically had the second draft or second version of the book. But I feel like the climax at the end was pretty much the same.
Fair enough. I will ask you about that one thing offline, so as not to spoil anything. But the thing that I think that I do know changed, and I loved. You made a short video on this that I thought was hilarious. The name of the country and the city. And could you talk a little bit about like your setting and how you came up with that? Because I think the story is so cool.
Yeah, so when I was writing this, I'm Australian, if you can't tell from the accent, and I was living in Tallinn, Estonia, which sort of random journey to how we got there. It started with an Instagram post and ended with a job offer. And when I was originally planning this book, I just imagined it would be based in like New York City or something, very Marvel Cinematic Universe, like Hell's Kitchen, something like that. And then I don't even remember when the idea came to me. It was in the planning month that I thought, I'm living in this really interesting place that not a lot of people have been to. So why don't I base the book here? And that was the start of it. So the book is based in Sudovia, which is basically Estonia, but I was really lazy. So I gave it a fake name so I wouldn't need to worry about being too accurate, which is why it's this fantasy country instead. But basically, the same as Estonia. It's northeastern European country, former member of the USSR. So you have that, Soviet history as well, and obviously the Russian mafia, which is lots of fun. Did you want me to get into how I named it?
Yeah, that would be great. Let's do it.
So it's not that not that impressive. I just thought it's in that part of Europe. So you've got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So I'm like, okay, it needs to have an IA ending. So it sounds like something from there. And I remember just like spitballing different names. And it was with my husband actually. And we landed on Sudovia, which I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like it could be a real place. And so that was the name I gave the country. And then it wasn't until I had one of my manuscript critiques and the editor got back to me going, so I Googled Sudovia and it was based in southern Lithuania. Is that what you were going for? And I'm like, no, this imaginary word I came up with was the name of a real historical place. So I ended up leaving it in there because I think it's a funny story, but...
I love that. And if you are watching and haven't seen, Jackie has it's a hilarious short on it. You think you're trying to come up with all of the IA ending words. It's great. Love it. I'm just going to pause for a second and say hi to people who are in the chat. So thank you
Hi,
for liking
everyone.
it, Emma.
Oh, actually, we've got Nervous Neuron in the chat, who is actually another one of my beta readers.
Oh,
She was my science expert person.
it's so cool. It's also awesome that you were able to get someone to do that sort of science read for you. Because there's
Yeah,
in the book too.
I was really lucky. So I don't know if I should give Nervous Neuron's real name, so maybe I won't. But Nervous Neuron went to high school with me, actually. We can see your comments. So we went to high school together, and she was always interested in neuroscience and is currently a doctoral candidate at Melbourne University in Australia. And even though the science in the book is mostly genetics focused, I was like, well, this is the closest person I have with expertise in this area. So I asked if she'd mind reading the book and giving me any feedback on the science. And yeah, she was great. And even in the most recent versions, so there's a scene with a rather sadistic doctor who tortures Hanna. And the feedback I got from one of my editors was he thought the scene was good, but because Hanna has an interest in science and genetics, she should be asking him about this, which hadn't even occurred to me. So I was like, okay, so I basically started Googling and went on this, I don't remember the name of the website now, but there's a website where you can look up different genes and see different things they affect, basically. So I added this discussion on different genes that could be up or down regulated based on someone's powers, and then send it off to Chris and said, would you mind checking this? I have no idea if it's accurate or not. And she actually had a colleague who had was studying genetics and gave it to him to give a once over as well. So I was so lucky.
That's awesome. So cool. And yeah, giving the people in your network too, I think is a really good thing to take away.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also have Ignatius Riley, and so I said that correctly. Hi, thank you for joining. And we also have DC McNeil. So if anybody has any questions for Jackie, please throw them in the chat, and I have a couple more, and we'll spend, if we have them, we'll definitely reserve time right at the end to go over anybody's questions who is watching. But thank you all so much for joining and hopping on. Okay. Yeah. Now, in my little plan for this interview, I had 3 sections. It was sort of like about the book, about the writing. Now it's about the publishing. And so, again, I've watched your videos.
So organized.
Thank you. I've watched your videos, so I know a little bit about, the process. But how did you come to the decision? Could you talk a little bit about sort of what brought you to self-publishing when you originally you were originally doing some querying?
Yeah, so I originally wanted to get a traditional publishing deal, and there were 2 main reasons for that. One was that I wanted validations. I wanted someone with a traditional publishing background to tell me that this book was good enough to publish, because obviously there are no gatekeepers with self-publishing, so it's very easy to self-publish something that's not great. And the second reason was because I wanted the marketing support of a traditional publishing house, because I hadn't tried to market a book to sell books before. So I didn't really know how to drive book sales, and I know that the amount of marketing support you can get from a traditional publishing house will vary, but I figured even if they weren't doing much, at least there might be someone I could talk to who could give me some pointers about things I could do on my own. And I started querying in, I think, August 2021 and did not have any luck. So I got some lovely rejection letters, but most of the time it was no response or rejection. And then at the beginning of 2022, I thought, okay, why don't I start entering this into competitions for unpublished books? And my thinking was that if I got an award or if I got shortlisted, that might generate some interest from traditional publishing houses. So entered a bunch of competitions, and then in August, which was quite funny actually, the timing. So I had just quit my job So this was like July, and maybe a week later, I got an email going, "Oh, I don't know if you saw, but you were actually a finalist in this competition you entered, and we'd love it if you could come to our awards dinner." And I checked the date, and the awards dinner was like the day after I was finishing my current job. So it sort of felt like it was meant to be. So, yeah, I left my job. I was living in Switzerland at the time, so left the job, got on a plane the next day, went to Nashville, went to the awards dinner, won the award, and that sort of provided the validation I was originally hoping for from traditional publishing. So one of the two things like had this big tick. And admittedly, I did use that as an excuse to resend a bunch of queries that where I hadn't gotten a response and to send a bunch of new queries. And I did actually get a request from that round, but unfortunately, oh no, I got a request, and then I also had a independent publisher who was interested in the book, but we spent over a month trying to organize a phone call, and I thought, if it's this hard to organize a phone call, how hard is it going to be to publish the book? So didn't end up pursuing that. But yeah, part one was the validation, which I got, and there were another couple of things that happened which were just more validation, which was nice. And the second piece was the marketing, and that independent publisher who was interested, part of the submission I had to do for them was a marketing plan for the book. So actually doing that exercise made me think, oh, maybe I do know like how to do this, or maybe I could do this myself. So just through the process of querying, I actually addressed the things that I was hoping to get from traditional publishing. So I came to the point where I was like, okay, well, by the end of 2022, if I haven't gotten any interest, I'm just going to self-publish. And here we are.
Amazing. I love that story, especially the whole like, quit my job, left job, got on plane, went to Nashville, won award at dinner. Like, so cool. Okay, we have some questions from Nervous Neuron, who I know is your friend.
Oh, hi, Danny. Just saw his comment.
Hey, Danny. Don't know who that is. I'm assuming a friend of yours. Very exciting.
Danny is one of my, yes, a friend, but also one of my former colleagues from Switzerland.
Very nice.
So we've got an international crowd.
I love it. I love it. So this is the question I think it fits in really perfectly. Did your background help with the writing and the marketing of the book? Because, of course, you said at the very beginning of the interview that you had a literal like book publishing kind of business to help entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so didn't help with the writing because all of the writing I'd done professionally was nonfiction. So I had a background, like a corporate background in copywriting and content marketing. And then my business was nonfiction publishing, so lots of how-to type of books. So it didn't help with writing the book. It definitely helped with publishing the book because I knew how to create a book. I knew how to brief the cover design and where to find designers. I knew how to set up my book for distribution, so print on demand and ebook. So the actual publishing process I knew about from my business, which was very helpful. Marketing the book this might open a can of worms. The experience I had in my business was for marketing books for a very different purpose. So the books that my clients wrote were more like business cards rather than a product for sales. So the author business model is your product is the book and you are selling the book for profit, and that's how you make your income. The entrepreneurial author business model was I'm going to write a book that will establish me as a leader in my field, and I'm going to use that book to get new clients, keynote speaking opportunities, media coverage, interviews, things like that. So the entrepreneurial author is probably willing to give away 50, 100, 200 books, knowing that if they give a book to the right person, that's going to be a 10 or 20 or $50,000 client, depending on the business. When you're an author, the book is the product. So you're trying to sell a lot more books. So there was some experience marketing books in the previous business, but it was marketing books to get them into the hands of the right people rather than trying to sell large quantities of books, if that makes sense. So I'm not going to say it wasn't helpful because I think everything we do sort of builds your knowledge and contributes to where you are today. but it wasn't like a template that I could just lift and apply to this book. This book is a very different proposition, very different market as well.
Amazing. It's really cool to hear you talk about the differences between them. And funny to think about the sort of entrepreneur business model of the book, like book as a business card. It's so different than how we approach it. It's still really cool though.
Yeah, and we did some great books as well. Like one of the things, again, this is the self-publishing thing, because there are no gatekeepers. There are a lot of not so great books out there, but yeah, my business, we had a team like you'd find at a traditional publishing house. Like we had professional editors and designers, and we would like often rewrite books for our clients if they needed rewriting. So we did a lot of great books.
That's so cool. And then we have another question also from Nervous Neuron here, and I think it's a great question because I also used to have this misconception too. How do you get books in bookstores if you are self-published? They thought self-publishing was the book, but it looks like it might be a misconception.
So, well, I recently did a reel where I go into a bookstore and remove someone else's books from the shelf and then put mine in their place. So that's one way to get your book in stores. Doing it legitimately, it is okay. So let's clarify. So self-publishing isn't necessarily just ebooks. You can self-publish physical, like hardcovers and paperbacks as well. The main difference between you self-publishing versus going with a traditional publisher is self-publishing, you're the one funding it. But like I mentioned with my former business, you can still access a lot of the same services. You can still access professional cover designers, editors, printers, if you want to do a local print run, distributors, and so on. So first part of the question is formats. You can do physical formats even if you're self-publishing. The stores question is a little bit more complex because obviously there are, I don't even know how many books in the world, millions of books in the world, and physical bookstores have very limited space. So that means not all of the books are going to be able to fit in the bookstore. And even when it comes to traditionally published books, not all of them will go in certain bookstores because there's limited space. What that means for self-published authors is most of them won't be in physical bookstores unless they become like uber successful, like E.L. James, 50 Shades of Grey, successful, then you'll get stocked everywhere. But if you're like me and no one really knows you yet, you're probably not going to be in physical bookstores. Where your book will appear is in online stores. So Amazon, Booktopia, the online version of Barnes & Noble, so the website rather than the physical stores. And the reason you can do that is because the distributor, so the main distributor that people use for physical books is Ingram Spark. They basically have a network of, I think it's 40,000 different book retailers. And the way it works is you will upload your digital files. So a PDF of the pages of your book, a PDF of the cover of your book, you will upload it to their dashboard, and then they will feed those files out to all of the bookstores, which will then populate the information on their website. And then when someone orders it, they will print a copy using those files and send it out. So does that answer the question?
I think it does. I think it does. We'll see if they reply in the comments here. But yeah, it's so much stuff that I had no idea about self-publishing as well. And cool to hear you kind of dive into that. The one other thing I wanted to ask about specifically, we got a yes. Yes, it answered the question.
Great, love feedback.
Love feedback. One thing I wanted to ask specifically about was the cover. Because the cover of Powerless is beautiful. You can see it on the thumbnail. But yeah, can you talk
where is it? That way.
Behind you too. Can you talk a little bit about it, and maybe just kind of, I'm interested in hearing some of the the Easter eggs in it, and the the cool things it represents.
Yeah, so I worked with. So for my cover design, I worked with a designer who I'd worked with in my former job in Switzerland, who is incredible. I didn't know what I wanted on the cover, which made things interesting. But when I briefed him in, I knew I had a lot of references for covers in a similar space and a similar genre targeting similar readers. So I did have a lot of information for him to work with. I just didn't have a description of, I want 2 hands on the cover, one holding a gun, one holding a beaker type of thing. So one of the concepts he suggested was, it's very close to what we have now. The main thing that changed is the colors. We have 2 hands, one is holding a gun, one is holding a beaker. And what we wanted to communicate with that was the sort of 2 different worlds that Hanna inhabits in this story. Because the first one is the very sterile environment of her father's lab. So that's the beaker. The other one is this more grittier world of the Brotherhood, which is the Russian mafia. So that's the gun. So that's the first image. Then as you look closer and closer, you start to see all of these little details. So I keep looking down because I've got a copy of the book in front of me, so I don't forget anything. But first, the beaker is on fire. This means a couple of things. One of them refers to her sister's fire powers. Another thing is that in the first chapter, there is an accident in the lab where Hanna accidentally sets one of her Petri dishes on fire. So fire has this meaning in the story. That's sort of the thing that kicks the events in motion. There is blood dripping from around the rim of the beaker, which speaks to like the violence in the book, as well as Hanna's tendency to self-harm. The text on the beaker is in Cyrillic, so a little nod to the location and the fact that this is country right next to Russia. And then around her wrists, I don't think it's going to be possible to see it. Oh yeah, you can see around her wrists, we've got this sort of chain, which is actually DNA, and it's really like spiky DNA. And the reason for that is because, like I think we mentioned earlier, there is a gene mutation that leads people to develop superpowers. So there's this DNA element. Her father's the geneticist who discovers this. Hanna wants to be a geneticist when she grows up. So this is a significant part of the book and a part of this character, but it's also spiky because it's this thing that's hurting her because she has this mutation, but she doesn't have powers and she's an outcast because of it. She also wants to be a geneticist like her father, but her father wants nothing to do with her because she's sort of this faulty product almost in his eyes. So it's this thing that she's passionate about, but it's also causing her a lot of pain. Then we get into the background. So in the background, you can see like there's a silhouette of, oh, this is really hard to do in reverse. There's like a silhouette of Hanna's head behind the hands, and behind her head, we can see like, sort of the sterile environment of the lab that I mentioned earlier. And then behind that again, we can see some of the European buildings. So these are just different shots of Estonia, but in this world, Sudovia.
Okay, that answers the question. I was like, what are these buildings? Like, did you have a specific one in mind? There's a building that comes into play that's like all kind of old and classic later in the book. I was like, is that what it's meant to be?
Well, the old classic building that comes into play later in the book is a fictional building, so it doesn't actually exist in real life Estonia. But no, that's not actually how so we're talking about Engelhart's auction house, I assume. That's not actually how I pictured the auction house with the towers. So I see this and I just think of like the old town of Kaxlina.
Lovely. I'm reading it too because I made a very brief visit to Estonia. Oh my God, like 10 years ago. Ooh, 16. And we obviously went to Tallinn, and I remember the old town and like there's the hill and there's kind of the town underneath. So it was really cool to read it and to hear about that in the book. And yeah, going back to the cover again, I think it's brilliant. Love all the Easter eggs and the fun little like nods to what the book is really about, and also the colors. Can we talk about the colors for 1 second? Because I love them. Like the purple, pink, orange. It's so cool.
Yeah, I love the colors. The original version of this cover was actually all red. And I didn't feel like, it's interesting because he chose red because like of the fire and the blood type of thing. And I'm like, well, if this was a book about Maria's point of view, maybe, because she's the one with the fire powers. But I feel like, the fire doesn't have a big enough, like it is significant because it's Hanna's sister and who really struggles with being a super and having these powers. But it's not a significant enough element of the story to influence the entire cover, like color scheme. So I basically gave that feedback and said, look, maybe something with a bit more blues or navies. And he came back with 3 different color versions, one which was sort of more green, one which was blue, and one which was the purple, which we went for. And yeah, I love it. I love it so much. He did an amazing job.
Amazing. We have a couple questions or comments in the chat here I'm just going to pull up before I get to my last couple questions. So, a question for Jackie from Australia. We have a big cultural issue with speculative fiction here. No one buys it. I'm interested in that. I didn't know that. Did the genre of your book find you, or did you choose it?
I think, like, I like to. I was going to say I like to write what I like to read, but honestly, I read everything, so that might not be so true. But I've always, since like I was quite young, early high school, have loved speculative fiction. I've loved fantasy. I've loved sci-fi. I've loved the idea of being able to escape and go on adventures. So those have always been the stories I've wanted to tell. But there's also an element of this story choosing me. Like I mentioned earlier in this call, I literally had a dream of one of the scenes in this book. And in the scene that I dreamt, like there was someone who had fire powers. So clearly this was going, if I say fire powers on its own, that could also be like a sort of a magic system, but it was also like more in a modern setting, so it felt more like superhero sci-fi. So yeah, this particular story chose me, I think, through that dream. But in general, I do like telling speculative fiction, and I feel like, maybe it won't do as well in Australia because people don't buy it. But when it comes to writing, I want to write in a way that's sustainable and where I can keep doing it for the long term. And I feel like it's going to be easier to keep writing for the long term if I'm writing things that I'm genuinely interested in and excited about.
Absolutely. I think writing what you're excited about is the number one thing to do. I guess a classic kind of case of writing for like what you're passionate about and interested in versus the market. Sort of.
Yeah, and the market changes as well.
Yeah, totally. On that, there's Australia.
Thank you. I'm glad you'll be buying it.
Oh, love it. We love that. Yes. Gotta read it. I was just going to say, I think it's so funny that Australia, that area doesn't buy a lot of speculative fiction because in my mind, a lot of like fantasy stories are like films there. With, like,
yeah, Australia and New Zealand.
It's like the land of Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. It's so funny.
Why?
Yeah, when I go to the bookstore, like especially in the young adult section, there is a lot of speculative fiction. But I think what I've noticed is if you're trying to get published here, there's a real focus on like more very Australian focused fiction or like literary fiction. I didn't even bother querying in Australia because there was no one interested in these types of book. All of my querying was the US and the UK.
That's really cool to hear, actually, because a lot of there's a similar thing, I think, in Canada. A lot of we sell a lot of fantasy and stuff, but a lot of the like Canadian fiction that you'll see on the bookstore that's like classified as Canadian, it is very literary, and it tends to be very issue heavy and kind of a like hard read.
Yes.
Kind of like the literary and like the gritty stuff. It's gonna take a while to read because you kind of have to put it down and go watch some comedy in between chapters. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to see the parallels there.
Yeah, I'm also a little bit disloyal to Australia, I guess, because most things I write tend to be set in Europe or somewhere Europe-like.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm also writing a story set in Europe, so just loyal to Canada, I guess. This comment I think is fun. Could you spell Sudovia for us?
Sudovia. Sudovia.
Yeah, beautiful. But I also think the PSEU spelling is kind of fun too. That's cute. Sudovia. Love it. All right. So, kind of the last couple questions I have for you here is, how does it feel to have your book out in the world? It's your first fiction thing that you've published. It was at least 2 years ago. How does it feel?
This is probably not the answer that people want, but it's a little anticlimactic, to be honest. Like, I think the publishing process is exciting and the different milestones you have. So when I first saw like the designs for the internal pages and the chapter headings have this DNA ornamentation, which looks so good. And when we like decided on the cover, that was really exciting. And then when I got my first printed books, like that was like, oh, wow, this is a big thing. But when I think about what happened on release day, which was Tuesday, all that really changed was the buttons on Amazon and the other websites went from pre-order to order. So it's like nothing really changed. All of the work had already been done. The book had been ready to go for a few months. So it almost doesn't feel any different, though there is a bit happening on Instagram at the moment with people sharing it, that's been really exciting.
That's so exciting. I don't use Instagram, but I do have an account I can log into occasionally. And so I may have been looking at your Instagram page recently and seeing the Bookstagrammers is taking pictures of it with all the flowers and stuff.
I know, that's been cool. I'm like, oh my God, I need to up my skills to make my book look this good.
I looked at that and I was like, I could never. So beautiful too. All right, so last question is, what are you working on now?
I'm working on the sequel to Powerless.
Yeah.
So I have sort of 3 projects that are in the works, and I've been rotating between them. So I'll do one for a certain period, then I'll put it aside and let it marinate a bit, and then go on to another one. So I wrote the first draft of the sequel to Powerless over Christmas and January, and then put it aside because I had like a few events coming up and I needed to work on something else in preparation for a retreat. And I just picked it up again about, let's say, 3 weeks ago. And it's a lot rougher than the first draft of Powerless one was, which is a little bit worrying, but I do have ideas about how to fix it. So I'm feeling very optimistic.
That's so exciting. I can't wait to read the sequel when you eventually publish that. I overall love Powerless. I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited that other people get to read this awesome book. I did reread it, by the way. I don't know if you could tell by my very specific
I can, as soon as you sent me, because you sent me the message going, 99, page 99, I love what you did here. And like, I had to go and look at what was on page 99 to figure out what you were talking about. So I knew you'd reread it.
A whole bunch of things, little pages turned over of like my favorite lines and favorite bits. It's so exciting, and I'm also very excited. Thank you for mentioning me in the acknowledgements too. I might have gone around to my friends and family and like shown them, like brought it to a wine night at my friend's house. I was like, look, my name's in a book. So yeah, I'm just so excited for you.
Thank you. No, and thank you for your help with it as well, because like you were one of the first readers back in 2020, and you know, you gave me such good feedback, which has then shaped the final version of the book. So I really appreciate it.
No worries at all. So I'm going to maybe wrap this up here. If you want to let us know kind of maybe one more time where we get the book, where we find you. I know it's also in our descriptions. Say it in case we need to go look at it right now.
Yep. So You can find me at jacquelinePretty.com. If you're curious about Powerless, you can also sign up to get the first 3 chapters of the book there for free. If you have already decided that the book sounds so amazing that you need to buy it now, the best place to buy it, or the easiest place, is Amazon, where you can get all 3 versions. So there's the paperback, the hardcover, and the ebook. Just go to Amazon and search for Powerless Jacqueline Pretty. And we'll also pop the link in the description for you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me. I really appreciate
Thank you
it.
for having me. This was great.
Yeah. Sorry for the slight technical difficulties. I think we've gotten a little bit better as the interview's gone on. So
Oh,
hopefully
definitely.
it's not too yeah. And everyone please read and leave reviews. I have to leave my Amazon review
Yes,
still.
please. Leave reviews. Hopefully good ones, but even if you don't like it, bad reviews help as well. So any reviews are good.
Incredible. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully,
Thanks, everyone.
we will be able to reduce the input